So, I know you guys are anxious to hear about our trip, and so I could go on for hours if you wanted me to. I will tell you this, one of the things I learned is I know how I could add 30 minutes to our service time if you would like. So if you'd like that, I can tell you how we do it. No, you're not going to like what I learned. That's the problem. So I did some leadership training there, and you know, they were asking me to kind of look at their services. And their announcement video, they do an announcement video like ours, 17 minutes long. 17 minutes. Then after that, they literally, to their own admission, they said, yeah, and then we preached the announcements for another 23 minutes. I did the math. That's 30 minutes. So we can have 17-minute announcement video, and then I'll get up and I'll preach the announcements to you. I thought to myself, that is nuts. But anyway, I learned that. No, it doesn't work because I don't even remember what they were doing that week. And I mean, it was to the point, I laughed because they were telling everybody what time church started when everybody was there. And then they preached them that it started. I'm like, you know, you really don't have to do that. Like, they're here. Like, they know what time church starts. Anyway, it was kind of funny. We laughed a lot. Pastor James and everybody that was here says, hey, thank you for sending us. They love you. They're praying for you. They want you to know that. You guys are legends in Uganda for how you took care of the choir. They couldn't stop talking about that. Like, whether it was Carol or Esther or Auntie Jessica, they're like, remember all that food we had? And remember how we got turkey every Thursday? And I'm like, I don't remember turkey. I remember vegetables, but, you know, whatever, you know. But you guys made a lasting impression on their lives, and so they wanted to say thank you. But this trip was a little bit different from the last one. 2 years ago when we were there, it was one of those moments where I shared with you that God really showed me the things that we couldn't do, and that was really hard to grasp when you're faced with things that you wish you could make a difference, but you know you can't do anything. It was really, really hard. But this year, it was not so much God showing us what we couldn't do, but God did something different. He showed us what he wanted us to see. And I think that might have been even harder. And I was trying to make sense of some of the things that we saw, and, you know, just through my thought process, I was like, you know what? It's a lot easier to stand up and say, hey, you know what, we need to be the hands and feet of Jesus, because we know that means we get to do these things. And I thought, but what if God calls us to be his eyes? And I thought, wow, that really kind of stings. It makes it a little more difficult. But then I realized that it's not so much that we're the eyes of Jesus, but I think that what God wants us to do, and the thing that he was showing me, is that what he wants us to do, what he wanted me to do, was to look at life through his eyes. And so for 3 weeks, I kind of was on this journey, and I'm a little slow. It took me till yesterday to realize that it was the journey that I was on. But it was how to look through life through Jesus' eyes. And I would just want to share with you a little bit of what that was like for me. And then I'm going to have the team that was with us come up, and they're going to share. But here's the thing. This trip was the worst travel experience I've ever had in my entire life. And I should have known it was going to be rough just from buying tickets, from a misspelled word or misspelled name on Abby's ticket to the battle trying to figure that out. Now, mind you, the first leg of our trip went smooth. We got to the airport, we got on the plane, we flew to Istanbul, we got off the plane, we got to our connecting flight, it was great. And I'm thinking, man, this is going to be great. So we get to Kenya, or to Entebbe, and then we get to Uganda, or to Kampala, and we're settling in, and everything is going well. We're there for a couple days, and it was our time to load another plane to go to Kenya. And we were all excited. We got up at 2 in the morning to get there at 3 to catch a 6 o'clock flight that was delayed for 3 hours. 3 hours in Uganda really turns into about 7 or 8 hours, and stuck in the airport when you can't sleep and you're awake. And, you know, I'll tell you what, Airport food is nasty, and you can only eat so much of that, but there you are. So 3-hour flight delay. We get to Kenya. We have a great time in Kenya, seeing Dave and Kim and loving on them. They say, thank you guys for loving them. Thanks for supporting them. It was just a great trip. And then we go to get on the plane at 6 o'clock in the evening this time, and our driver drops us off there. And all of a sudden, our flight is delayed again, 6 hours. So now we are there in the airport trying to sleep, and I'm thinking to myself, this is not good. We were waiting. Next thing you know, 6 hours turned into about 8 hours. And next thing you know, we're getting on the plane at 2 o'clock in the morning to fly an hour and a half to Entebbe. And yes, it was amazing. Not really. It was brutal. So then all of a sudden we come to, we get up at 2 in the morning again. It's time to come home on Tuesday. And so we get up at 2, take showers, get ready, load the van, get in the van, drive to Entebbe, get up, we walk up to the thing. Your flight is delayed 12 hours. Or no, not delayed. No, sorry, back up. Wasn't delayed. It was canceled. Totally canceled this time. And so they put us in a hotel. We're like, oh, great. Problem is, at that point, you can't sleep. Everybody's wide awake. It was brutal. So then we finally get on the plane and we get to Istanbul. We have a 6-hour layover trying to sleep in Istanbul, where they really love Americans. Just kidding. They really don't. And we finally get on the plane to come back to America. We get on the plane, and I couldn't get 3 seats for Connie and JT and I right next to each other. So Connie and JT were here, and I was sitting next here. Connie was in between one guy with ADHD and a 12-year-old with ADHD. Okay. I'm sitting next to this poor little Asian couple that are like about 60 years old. So I walk in, I'm like, oh, that's my seat. The guy looks at me like, are you kidding me? I'm like, sorry, buddy, let's get close. About 2 hours into the flight, he gets up and he leaves, and he comes back. He's like, you're okay? I'm out of here. I'm like, all right, great. And so we got some space, so I'm sitting to speak between me and his wife, and next thing I know, all of a sudden, she's laying her head almost on my lap. It was the most uncomfortable feeling in the world. So I'm sitting here, and nuts, crazy. It was totally crazy, creepy, everything you could imagine. That's what it was. Okay, like I said, it wasn't until yesterday that I really got the understanding of why all this was happening. Again, I'm a little slow. I'm not a devil behind every bush type of guy, but I really do believe we have an enemy that if he can do one thing, I think he realizes he wins, and that is this. If he can get our eyes off of what really matters, then we lose sight of what God is doing, because then we're not looking through life through the lens of Jesus. And so, truth of the matter is, with this trip, we saw things that we will never be able to unsee. Things that will probably forever be etched in our hearts. Things that broke our hearts, things that brought us great joy and encouragement, things that made us laugh, things that made us cry, things that brought joy, but things that also brought frustration. And again, these are things that we will never forget, because they are forever going to be etched there. But the main thing that God showed me was this. You don't have to go to Uganda to have God open your eyes to see what he's doing. Although you're all welcome to come. The reality is this: the world we live in is broken. And it doesn't matter where you are. Solomon put it this way: there is nothing new under the sun. And it doesn't matter if you're here or across the world. And so what I want to share with you today is what God revealed to me through the things that we saw on this trip. And if I break down, I'm sorry, but not really. That's just the type of trip it was. And so I got to preach Genesis chapter 8, for the first 2 weeks that I was there. And then the last week, Pastor James went back to preach on Genesis chapter 6. And it was fascinating to me because as he went through the whole Nephilim and all of that, what really jumped out to me is what the last part there in verse 8 that God said before the flood came. And what it showed me is that everything that Jesus sees is through grace. It's through grace. And verse 8 says this, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now, mind you, I've been already thinking about being the eyes of Christ and kind of beginning to think about this. And so I started doing a word study on the word eyes while we were there. And it's interesting because this is the first time that the phrase eyes of the Lord is mentioned in the Bible. And I tell you that because there's this thing when you're studying the Bible, it's called the law of first mention. And what that says is that the first time a phrase or a word is used in the Bible, what it does is it plays itself throughout the whole thing. So that's kind of the foundation for that. And to me, what was interesting is if you go to Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 through 39, Jesus says this. He says, but of the day and the hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, there were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. So we're living in the days like Noah. And therefore, I think it's very important for us to look at the world through the lens of God's grace. Because it's messed up. You see, when the world was at its worst, God chose to look at it through his grace. And we cannot separate God from his grace. They go hand in hand. You see, we drove by people and wondered if they were ever going to eat that day. We looked at their homes and we wondered, how in the world can they sleep in that? We saw all the filth and the trash and wondered, how could people live like that? And with all that, we hadn't even made it to the airport yet. Then we walked through a dump site in Kenya, knowing that many of the commandments were going to be broken that day. We walked the streets, if you want to call them that, hardly a street, where you knew that there were women and children who were being abused, neglected, and taken advantage of. We continued walking by children and wondered, are they going to even make it through the day alive? We were told that if we were to give these street kids in Uganda some food, that we risk being arrested. It's illegal. We learned that there's two guys in particular in Kampala that are promising these street kids security. If they would just go beg for money, bring them back the money, that they would take care of them. But I'll tell you this, their idea of taking care of someone is a lot different than ours. The political scene in Uganda is not any better than it is here. On this trip, I learned that if I focus on what I have no control over, I will be totally hopeless. And there's so much that we saw that we had no control over. But I also learned that if I chose to look at things through Jesus' eyes, and I chose to look at it through the grace that God is extending, that I could have some hope. You see, God's grace is universal, and it accomplishes the same thing for everybody. For it is by grace that you're saved. We're all saved by the same grace. But not only that, but we're also sanctified by the same grace. But not only that, God's grace is what sustains us as well. So God's grace saves, God's grace sanctifies, and God's grace sustains. God's grace reminds us of his victory over what we despise of most in this world. Because it's God's grace that makes a difference. It's God's grace that gives us hope. Hope that God is still graciously working today. And I think the main thing that I learned is that people are hoping we will see them with the same grace that saved us. And that doesn't matter where we are in the world. The second thing I learned is that Jesus looks for opportunities to bring hope. And I found this in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 18 through 23. I wanted to look at that. It says in verse 18, "The eyes of your understanding being enlightened, that you may know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints, and what is the exceeding greatness of his power towards us who believe according to the working of his mighty power." Some of you might be wondering, well, why did you guys go to Uganda anyway? And if I'm honest, I have to tell you that I question that myself at times. Thinking to myself, how much more could be done if we just sent the money to Uganda than us going on a trip? But one of the things that God reminded me of is this. It doesn't matter how much money we have. It doesn't matter how much money that's out there. Money will never offer the hope of showing up. It might alleviate a hardship for a time. But one of the things that God showed me is this. People need hope, not just cash. They need you to come alongside them. They need you to listen to them. They need you to embrace them. They need you to bring grace into their midst. They need you to be there. Because what they need to know is that the hope that they're hoping in and the hope that they're hoping for is really the fact that they know that they're not alone. And so many people lose hope when they feel like they're alone, that they're isolated. So we went to Uganda because in 2020, God did something that you can't explain. God made strangers our neighbors and then turned our neighbors into our family. And there's people in Uganda that are now our family. And so we went to check on the people that we care about, to encourage them, to remind them that they are not alone. And I will tell you this, our showing up did more for them than any money could ever buy. Why? Because we showed up with no agenda. See, sometimes what happens is on short-term mission trips, you show up and you got your plan. I'm going to go do this. The problem is that might not be what they need. But yet, doggone it, I've got to accomplish what I said I was going to do. You laugh. Why? Because the only thing that you're going to accomplish is a great bit of frustration for you and the people you're there to serve with. Amen. So we showed up with no agenda other than this. We wanted to make Jesus famous. And you know what? People were encouraged. We did Sunday school teaching could you imagine being in a classroom with 65 kids? And that was just one class. In a room smaller than this. We did leadership training. It was amazing when I took all their cell phones. They freaked out. I was like, give me it. We did, John did some carpentry stuff. I'll let him tell you those stories. Hanging out with kids, women's groups, men's study. We walked through the dump site with Dave. We visited homes. We went to this. You think we take testing serious here? Like, any of you took tests and you were afraid of getting busted for cheating? Be glad that, when you were a kid, they didn't have armed guards there to shoot you if you cheated. Like, they weren't really going to shoot you if you cheated. But we went to the school and they were having their testing, and we drove up. This armed guard walks out of the building from the government, making sure we didn't even enter the gate. That's how serious they take it. It's kind of crazy. We showed up. We went to church with Dave. I met Charles. I don't know if you guys got to see the Charles video. He was hammered before 9 a.m. It was amazing. I love Charles. I'm a Charles. Yes, you are, Charles. Jack, our driver, he was great in Kenya. Michael, our driver, was amazing. No agenda but to make Jesus famous. And one of the things we realized is that God was pursuing people and offering them a hope that money couldn't buy. And so when you show up with nothing in your hands but Jesus and a lot of candy, that helps. You know what it does? It brings hope. It brings hope. And I'm learning that people are really hoping that we'll show up not to fix them, not to fix the problems that they might be facing, but to journey with them through life, to walk with them. So when we look at life and people through the eyes of Jesus, we're going to look for opportunities to bring them hope, the hope that Jesus is offering them. And they will see that as we walk with them. And then the final thing that God showed me was that Jesus changes how we view the world around us when we look through the lens of his grace. In verses 20 through 23, it says, which he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at the right hand in the heavenly places, far above all principalities and powers and might and dominion and every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in that which is to come. And he put all things under his feet and gave him to be head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. And so finally, when we see things through Jesus' eyes, we look at what is going on in our world differently. And what I mean is this: we look at it from a place of victory rather than defeat. So many people feel like God lost for some reason. I've read the end of the book. He won. Amen. He won. Now, that doesn't mean it's not easy or it's easy now. No, there's difficulties that we face. But he still won. He is victorious. And so we move forward and we journey with people from a place of victory, not a place of defeat. Amen. And we don't have to try to manipulate God to bring about a defeat. Or bring about a victory, I should say. You see, and what I'm finding is that people need to be reminded that Jesus hasn't lost. Because he hasn't. And you don't have to go to Africa to see things through Jesus' eyes. Actually, God wants it to start with, and I put 3 dots, ... because I think you know. Might be a stranger, might be your neighbor, and it might even be your family member. But he wants us to look at them through his grace. Whoever it is, know this, that Jesus is still victorious, that Jesus is still offering hope, and Jesus is still saving, sanctifying, and sustaining people by his grace today. And he makes that grace available to a broken world through broken people like you and I. One of the things that I quoted in our leadership training was a quote from Warren Wiersbe. And it's probably my most favorite quote on ministry. Wiersbe says this: ministry takes place when human needs are met by divine resources through loving channels to the glory of God. So, ministry is when human needs, broken people, are met with the divine resources of God's grace through loving channels, you and I, to God's glory. And that happens when we show up. You see, those divine resources are delivered through you and I as we see people the way Jesus sees them. As we see them through his grace, as we bring in them hope, as we look at the world through his eyes and see it differently. And so I just want to encourage you guys with this. You're already doing it. Don't stop. Continue. And I want to invite the guys that went with us, so if you guys can come on up, and I just want you to hear from them what they saw. And then we have so John, I got you first, so come on up, John. Rachel, I know you're in here. Connie, Lexi, Abby, come on. Come on up. So, this is John. Why don't you share with him what you saw, John?
Well, I saw a lot, experienced a lot. The people have a lot of love for each other. They come together really well. They don't seem to have great leadership when it comes to skills for construction type of work. So I did some tile for them in the girls' dormitory in the kitchen area, and I carpeted a stage and fixed the sides of the stage that connected. During that period of time, I went up there with some tools thinking, okay, I'm going to need some tools. So I brought some up there. I needed a lot more. It's really interesting because here, if you need something, you can just go to Ace Hardware. Over there, if you need something, you need a whole day to plan what you need to be able to get down there, to get it, to get back. And it takes a lot of preparation to be able to manage the situation. So we have one thing. We have here doing tile work, we have bags of mortar. Over there, they have glue, sand, and concrete. It's not really a bag of mortar. You can't just... You can't just pour it out, mix it, and you're ready to go. No, you have to figure out the mix that you want, how to do it right, and hope that the concrete's good enough that when you're doing it, it doesn't totally dry up before you start setting tiles. So it was very difficult, the situation that we had to deal with there when it came to that. I went there to try and teach some people how to do a skill. I had to learn how to do it myself. So it was a little tricky. We got it done. I did get frustrated a couple of times and had to step back and then reimagine the situation and come back at it, with a different perspective. The wood there that they have, when I was rebuilding the stage, it looked like a rainbow. You couldn't exactly build a wall with it, Your wall would have looked like this. It was... So you had to kind of figure out different ways to manage the situation to get it done. I hope that I was able to leave some skills with some people that they may not have had prior to me being there, at least some hope that they can do more than what they thought. It was definitely some hard things to see, but I think as far as my experience there goes, I really enjoyed the smiles that the people had and the love that they shared for one another, even though that their life wasn't easy at all. When I say we are spoiled, we are so spoiled. So I don't know. I think that's it.
So, tell them your experience coming back from getting your materials.
So it was about a 20-minute drive to the city to get the materials, and it was on a Friday. Traffic got so bad by the time that we had left, it took us about 6 hours to get home. It was it was pretty bad. Our battery died on us at once. We got pulled over. Apparently you have to wear a seatbelt if you're a passenger in the front seat. But if you're in the back seat, you're good, or if you're riding on top of the vehicle, you're fine. Yeah. So if you're white in the passenger seat, you better be wearing your seatbelt. They will fine you. So yeah, those.
Yeah, and he wasn't joking about the wood either. So Rachel, we learned a lot about Rachel, but we're not going to go into that. But
please don't.
You want us to sing their song?
No. So I'm going to begin where a few months ago in the beginning of this year, I was going to Calvary Chapel, and someone had come up that just got back from Africa, and they said, if anyone invites you to go to Africa, you should say yes. I'm going to pass that on. If someone invites you to go to Africa, you should say yes. I remember when he said that, because Sean had asked a while back, I think it was when you guys got home, I should come the next one. And I remember thinking all the reasons I couldn't go. And when that guy said that, it just wouldn't leave me. And then I'm like, okay, if Sean asks me one more time, I will go. And he did. And I was like, I got to go. And I'm telling you, it's amazing. And I do have a few stories, but I want to, as Sean was talking about, it's so overwhelming that it can really crush you. But if you just try to look through what the Lord wants you to see, you can really focus on what his purpose is. Sean saw hope, that we can bring hope, God's hope to these people. And on the flight back, I was just praying, Lord, why were we here? Because you do a lot. We were super busy. But then so you're asking why we were there. I know, it just sounds odd. It's an odd question to ask yourself. But the word that came to me was God's love. And 1 John 4:11 through 12 came to me and into my heart. It says, "Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God," which is interesting how Sean brought up that God opened our eyes, and this verse is saying that no one has ever seen God. We haven't seen God. How do we know God exists? How do we know that Jesus exists, right? And he tells us, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. We can't see God, but when we love each other, and that's what you guys do so well, as I have seen over the years, that we love each other. And when we love each other, people can see God. And when we were over there, we weren't just loving people, they were loving us. And I remember thinking, I'm seeing God. They're loving me. Why are they loving me? This is only God can do that. I remember on that layover, it was I'm telling you, God is like, I'm going to teach you some patience. So,
She was ready to come home, let me tell you.
I know. I try to be kind about it and respectful. But I was sitting out having breakfast during our layover. During the day, they sent us to a hotel to take a nap during the day, and which is very, very difficult. But one nice thing, they did provide breakfast. So I go to the table, sitting by myself, which was fine. And I'm enjoying, they had wonderful bread. I'm telling you, the bread was wonderful. So that was a positive. So I'm sitting there, and this lady, and I know there's so many stories, but I'm just showing you how good God is and how much he loves us and loves people. And this lady sits next to me. You know, she was eating alone too, so she sat next to me, and I'm just praying. I hope she speaks English, because they can speak 5 languages, and I have one, you know. And so she sits down, and we start talking, and whatever the conversation we're having, she knows I'm a Christian. She goes, I'm a Christian too. And I was like, that's wonderful. And I said, isn't it just amazing how you live somewhere in Africa and I live somewhere in America, and we know the God we serve is real because we're loving each other right now. And she just looked at me like, that's right. Like it was encouraging to each of us. And that was just a moment. And then we were there for 3 weeks. The whole 3 weeks were like that. Just loving. You don't have to go to Africa to love each other, right? We can show people God just by loving them. And that's one thing I took, you know, like you said, there was a lot, but it was wonderful.
She's last.
Oh, sorry. So who's next? Abby?
Oh, okay. I don't know what to say, but I know I don't like public speaking. I don't know what to say. 2 words. You rock, Abby. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. I gotta say one thing that God taught me there was to have faith, because even though they didn't have anything, they saw God through me. And especially being at the high school, they were like, oh, new person. They were so welcoming. And I was like, I didn't really know what to do at first. And then one of the girls was like, come with me. So I sat in their classrooms, and it was really nerve-wracking because I was the only white person in a room of 60 black people. So yeah, that's all I gotta say.
We were in Africa, Abby. Okay, just in case you were wondering. Come on, Lexi. You're there, right there. Lexi.
Come on, Lexi. You can look back. 2 words. You were there. We want to hear about it. Tell me why you want to go back. Yeah, why do you want to go back to that? And leave me.
Come on.
I don't want to do this. Y'all are all looking at me. This is weird.
So what was one of the things that you did that you will remember the most?
Going to the school.
And why was that? What made it special?
I don't know.
So you could pray for her that God will bring to remembrance the things that he did, and so.
It's really difficult to think of just a couple things to say because there's so much. I know so many of you this morning, came up, how's your trip? And so much goes through my mind when you ask that question. Where do I even start? I don't know. So that's, like Rachel said, there's so many stories and so much. I think a couple highlights would be Rachel and I got to teach 2 different women's groups. One was open for all the women in the church, and the other one was just for the married ladies. And that was a really special experience. And we both really felt like what we shared with the women was what God gave us to share, because we had a blank slate. They didn't really give us any, parameters of what we should talk about. So, that was really, we felt like God just really gave us the words to share with the women. And Tuesday was the day, and that evening was the day that we were going to share that night. And I woke up Tuesday morning with a horrible migraine. And I only get them a few times a year, but they're just horrible. And I thought, great, out of our whole trip, out of the whole past 3 months. This is the day that I would wake up with a migraine and just feeling discouraged. And I texted a couple people and asked for prayer. Pray for me, I've got a migraine. So to make a longer story short, couple hours, migraine was gone. I got up Tuesday to share in front of the ladies, and I just started sharing. About halfway through what I was sharing, it suddenly hit me that I wasn't nervous at all, that I actually had absolutely no nerves getting up there and sharing in front of the ladies. And that, I know that that was those prayers from the people, because I usually am pretty nervous to get up in front of people. I've worked on it. I've learned a lot on how to do it, but it usually does make me pretty nervous. So, but halfway through, it just hit me that God not only took away my migraine, which is huge, but he also took away all of the nerves. I just was able to get up there and be totally confident, know that I was sharing what God had for us to share with the women. And we had a really great time with the women. When we shared with the married ladies, we just had a really sweet time of fellowship with them. And, you know, these women, they are some tough, tough women. They have been through and are going through very difficult things that's hard for us to even imagine here in the United States. But the joy that these women have is just, it just is amazing. It's so encouraging for me, and I know for Rachel too, to hear some of their struggles and trials that they go through, but then to see the joy on their faces and see how deeply they rely on God for their strength to get them through every day. And I mean, that for us, it's just so encouraging to see that. I think their joy, their strength, just sometimes I felt like I didn't really have anything to tell them because they had it, man. They knew. They know what serving the Lord is. They know what it means. And, you know, what do I have to tell them? But, you know, God's words. The other thing that really struck me when we were there, the first day or so, I noticed, well, to back up, 2 years ago when we were there, it was right at the end of COVID for us here in the United States. They still had no schools open in Uganda when we were there 2 years ago. All the kids were out of school. They were all on the streets because their houses are so teeny tiny. They don't stay in their houses unless they're sick. So they're all on the streets. We kind of got used to that. So going back this time, I knew school was in session. And I'm looking at our neighborhood, and man, there's tons of kids in the neighborhood, school-age kids. There's little ones, but school-age kids running around. I asked our driver, I said, what's the deal? To our driver, I said, you know, all these kids, school's back open. Why are the kids out? Why are we seeing so many kids? He goes, oh, they're the ones whose parents can't afford school fees. And so tons of kids. So I'm looking at these kids that should be in school, but aren't and probably won't go to school unless, you know, God provides for them. And, you know, living on the streets, living in the situation that they live in. And then we visited the school, Light Africa, that Pastor James runs, where he does child sponsorships and all that, and saw the kids who are in school, in the classroom. The high school, Abby and Lexi spent a lot of time at the high school. And the difference between these kids who are in school and the outlook for their future is so significantly different from the kids that are in the neighborhood that we saw. And just to see how such a little thing, like us sponsoring a kid or two, to see that paying off in such an obvious way, and to go, I think one of my favorite parts was visiting the high school church service. So there's a church service at Kampala Community Church that we were at the first 2 Sundays. The last Sunday we went to the high school, or the girls' dormitory, where they have a church service specifically for the students at the high school because it's a boarding school. So a lot of the students come from far away and they have a service there. And that church service was amazing. I mean, those kids, it was all led by the kids. Everything was done by the kids. The music, the sound system, everything was done by the kids, or for, the high school kids did. And it was an amazing service. Those kids love the Lord so much. And to see the difference between those kids and the kids that are just running around the streets, and to see how God's hand works through just the little things, to give these kids a chance for their future. You know, if you ask any of those high school students what they want to be when they grow up or what they want to do after high school, they've got an answer. They'll tell you, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a teacher. You know, they've got all these great ideas that those are going to become reality for a lot of those kids. You know, but the little guys running around up and down in our neighborhood, you know, nothing. I mean, they just don't have that. And so that was really eye-opening. It was good. It was a good experience. But really, overall, just the love, you know, the love of God, like Sean talked about, you know, us loving them loving us. It's mutual. We don't love them any more than they love us, you know. And it was great. It was a good trip.
John wanted to say one more thing.
I just wanted to touch on something. When we were in Kenya, this really sticks out in my mind. It has nothing to do with the work that I went there to do, but just what really hit my heart. I was walking through the dump site. We went to some homes that were sponsored by Refuge here, like Pastor Sean and the family. And one of them that we went to really, it got me really good. It was just this lady. She had 2 kids. Her husband couldn't work at the time. He was looking for work. She worked, and while we were there, they were just being really nice. And David starts asking questions about what's going on and talking to them. And it turned out that this lady was 3 months behind in her rent. They were coming to lock her door the day that we were there. Nobody knew this. They were going to be out. 2 kids, the wife, the husband. He says, "Where's your husband at?" "Oh, he's out looking for work. He's a driver. He can't find work." She says, "Where are you working?" "Oh, I work at the factory." "How much do you make?" "Not enough." You know, one of the kids is sponsored. One of the kids was not sponsored. The fact that she wanted both of her kids to go to school. She was paying for the tuition for her child to go to school, the other one that wasn't sponsored. And that's why she couldn't afford her rent and everything, because of the cost of everything. You know, they needed 2 incomes to be able to provide for that. So the option was, hey, do I feed the kids and send them to school, or do I put a roof over their head? These are their choices. This is the life that they live, and this is how hard it is for them. I mean, just to sponsor one child and give them opportunity to lift them up and give them an opportunity to be something more than they ever thought they could be, you know, it makes such a huge difference. I mean, we can't just fix everything, but we can help some things.